Welcome to week number 9 in our journey through the book of Philippians. It's hard to believe that we only have one more left. It's all gone so fast. And today we're going to look at a section that when you initially read it may seem somewhat unconnected. It may feel like Paul's just jumping from one theme to another. And what I want to do as we look at verses 2 to 9 of chapter 4 is try and show you some of the connective tissue, how each of these things in fact are connected to what precedes and what follows. And I want to start by looking with you at verses 2 to 3. Yeah, you see them beside me here on the screen, so I'm not going to read them for you. But what we're seeing here is something that Paul's already been hinting at in not the gospel, but his epistle. He's been talking about how there's division in the church and that there seems to be some friction, some lack of getting along. He calls the church to humbleness and to consider the needs of others and so on. And here we have a specific example of why he had to ask that. We get a behind-the-scenes glimpse at some of the dysfunction in Philippi. Two members of the church are struggling to get along, two women that are very well known to Paul, and they each seem to be very commendable servants of God. They seem valued, they seem influential within that local church family. In fact, Paul even says that he served side by side with them for the sake of the gospel. But something's happened in their relationship. They're not getting along with one another. We're not told why. It's not really our business. But their inability to get along is making a mess, both of the witness of the church, but also just the unity of the church as it draws more and more people into it. And so he pleads with them. And I don't think that's too strong a word. The word actually speaks of earnestly requesting. He's not commanding, he's begging that the two of them be of the same mind in the Lord. And I think that language is incredibly important for us to understand. And we've already seen that same language, haven't we? Let me ask you, where did we see earlier in this letter Paul saying we need to be of same mind? Likely you're aware the answer is the beginning of chapter 2, where Paul calls the church to have the same attitude as that of Jesus Christ, right? Who humbled himself even to death to serve us, putting our needs and our interests even ahead of his own. And now he's calling these two ladies in the church to practice what he wrote earlier in chapter 2. He's not saying that they have to agree about the specifics. He's not saying they can't have a different understanding about the problem before them. But what he is saying is they can't forget their common ground. That even in their disagreement, even as they're working it out, they need to remain focused on what's greater. What's greater is Jesus Christ himself and the mission he's given to the church. They need to be of the same mind in the Lord. They need to keep their eyes focused on, as you see at the end of verse 3, the book of life, that they're each written there. There's many in the world who are not yet in that book. So here's this important lesson for us 2,000 years later. When we find ourselves in conflict, even today with other Christians, I think the answer to our conflict is to circle back to Philippians chapter 2 and apply what we read there to ourselves in our unique conflict. Humbleness, service of others, considering their needs, and so on. Keeping in mind the Apostle Paul elsewhere said, as much as it depends on us, we're to seek peace. But it also implies there that while we might want peace, we're not always going to be able to assume the rest of another person. But the part we play in it must be that of a peacemaker. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. So we should not let our arguments and our disagreements prevent us from being able to work for the sake of the gospel. And even more, Paul even says there's a place in conflict within the church for other believers to intervene and play that role of peacemaker. And so with all of those things in mind, then, it makes sense that the Apostle Paul would pivot by calling these early Christians to let their gentleness be evident to all. And I think that's some of the connective tissue in our text. That word gentleness speaks of being equitable or yielding yourself to another person. Some translations might even say, be reasonable, or quit being unreasonable. The word speaks of having a generous spirit that rises above offense. It speaks of being patient. It's an attitude that doesn't insist on its own rights, but again, like Philippians 2, is modeled after the same attitude of Jesus Christ. And as he calls the church to gentleness, as he calls the church, including these two ladies, to be reasonable with one another, he also gets to the heart of the matter. For conflict, yes, but even just for life in general. And that's pressing on to know and to become more like Jesus Christ, which he said last week was his goal. Right? As life is happening to us, as life is happening all around us, there's so much that can weigh us down, that can press and crush upon us. There's so much that can threaten our joy and spill over into our relationships, just like these two ladies. And Paul knows this. Keep in mind Paul's situation. He's currently under house arrest. It's a 2-year period. He's awaiting to find out the verdict of whether he lives or whether he dies. Paul's very familiar with the themes that he's sharing to the church in Philippi. He's chained to a soldier, yet he's able to rejoice. He's chained to a soldier, yet he's able to be gentle, because no matter what happens, he knows the Lord is near. Now, on one hand, the fact that the Lord is near does just recognize we're a day closer to the coming of Jesus Christ, to be with him and leave the trials of this life behind. But it also means as we wait, the Lord is near to us. He's our closest companion. He cares, he knows, he understands, and he wants us to come to him with all of our requests, with all of our worry, and pour it out to him in prayer. And so we learn prayer is an outlet for the stress and the anxiety and the things that weigh upon our hearts. In every single situation of life, we can go to God and talk to him about what's troubling us. We can bring our requests to him with confidence. Even more than that, we can bring our requests to God with thanksgiving. As Paul says in verse 8 and 9, we should discipline our minds to think about the things that are noble and pure and right and lovely, that are admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. Instead of just focusing on what's negative, instead of just worrying about things that are out of our control, we should look for ways to see how God's at work. We should look for ways to see how he's faithful. And then we should praise him. We should give him thanks for those things. So you could actually say thanksgiving is an antidote to the venom of anxiety. And again, that's exactly what the Apostle Paul is doing here. He's under house arrest. He's under the sword of Nero. It hangs above his head, so to speak. And so Paul talks to God about it all. Paul praises God for the way that he's still at work and hasn't forgotten about the apostle. He focuses his thoughts on things that are excellent and lovely, like how the gospel's going out, even to places through Philippi. And in the midst of it all, Paul's heart and mind were guarded by the peace of Jesus Christ. Guarded. That's an interesting word choice, isn't it? Keeping in mind what's at the other end of Paul's chain. A Roman soldier who's guarding him. Paul's using a military image, and the word means to take into protective custody. So as Christians, when we're stressed and we're worried, if we follow the wisdom here provided by Paul, our hearts and minds can be brought into the protective custody of God's peace. Not a cool thing? If we trust God, if we go to him with our worry and our thanksgiving, no matter how rough life is, he brings us into his protective custody. It's not Roman soldiers that guard Christians. It's the peace of our loving God. And once again, the Apostle Paul is living proof of this. He's given us an example to follow, and he's not asking us to do anything that he himself is not already doing. And as we practice what he preaches, his experience can be our own. The peace of God himself will be with us. The God of peace himself will be with us. That's a cool thought. It's not just that God sends peace from afar. It's not that God's aloof or God's distant, hanging out in heaven while we're down here, and occasionally he'll send us something, he'll toss us a bone. Not just that he sends peace, it's that he, the God of peace himself, enters into our trials, enters into our suffering, enters into the worry and anxieties we carry, and he walks with us. The Holy Spirit, who is God himself, dwells inside of us, leading us in the most personal and intimate way through everything that is to come. So that's my prayer for you this week, that you would be able to rejoice through whatever you're facing, that your gentleness would be evident to all, that you'd go to God with your worries and your anxieties, and you'd cast all of those things to him, knowing that he cares, that your thought life would be set upon things that are excellent and lovely and praiseworthy, that you would be looking for ways that God is faithfully at work in your life, providing for you, and that you would thank him for those things, and that your hearts and your minds would be brought into the protective custody of the peace of God. So I can't wait to chat about these things with you Wednesday night, June 3rd. Zoom details are beside me on the screen, or you can see them below in the link provided. I look forward to seeing you, and as I say every week, if you haven't made a Zoom yet, come. We've got 2 left. I hope to see you at both of them. And other than that, I pray that you would have a great week. And I pray that the God of peace himself would be with you. So have a great week, everyone. Bye.